So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Talk, Play, Collaborate. I'm Jenna Macrory and I'm here with Calum Walker today. We've been given this very exciting opportunity by Dumfries Music Conference to kind of discuss what COVID has done to the music industry. So today we're going to be kind of speaking about some of the creative opportunities and creativity during lockdown and the pandemic. So we thought to kind of start us off today and introduce ourselves, we would tell you a little bit about who we are and what we were doing before the pandemic started off and where we are now in contrast. So Callum?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a guitar player. I'm a songwriter as well. Been on the go for a while, based in Dumfries. My main project is a band called Turbine, who are primarily based in Dumfries as well. I'm now a music student as well. I'm now at the RCS studying composition. I'm in my first year there. So before COVID, at the end of 2019 into 2020, the band was gigging quite regularly. We had a kind of good routine of regular practices. Our second album was on the way. We were working very hard towards that, spending lots of time in the studio. We were experiencing a few issues with the kind of the drudgery of being a modern musician, and the struggles you have to face, the commitment to gigs, the traveling, the late nights, and then jump to now, and in my second term at the RCS, which is all been online. Well, not all, but at the moment it's all online. Turbine have completed a new album, but despite being able to progress at distance and keep up digitally and stuff like that, we haven't had a band practice, or certainly not a gig, since the very beginning of 2020.
Yeah,
What about yourself, Jenny?
round up. So kind of prior to the lockdown, I was studying music. I still am studying folk and traditional music at Newcastle, and I was I was involved in quite a lot of different projects, but obviously for the end of term, I was kind of working quite hard towards all of these performance deadlines and all of these concerts that we have to do as part of our course. So obviously COVID kind of derailed that. And I was also working quite hard with my traditional trio. We're called Real, creative name. Because we had a lot of kind of gigs planned over summer, and it was looking like last summer might have been kind of our chance to kind of get our footing in the national folk scene a little bit. But then fast forward to now, I would say I'm probably more of a producer now, because over lockdown, I feel like my musical practice has just completely changed. And now I do much more production kind of focused stuff that I guess works better for individual work or less collaboration anyway.
A lot of my week was orientated around band practice and gigs. So, I mean, I used to really love, a Friday night after work. We would all head out to this freezing cold garage, and we would stand around for 2 hours and just, we'd be miserable, like we could barely move our fingers. We could, all this hard work that we'd put in through the week to learn songs or practice them was completely wasted when we got there, because we would just think, let's get out of here. But I used to love getting in there and messing about with the technology and stuff like that, wiring up some of our equipment in different ways, seeing if there was more efficient ways to run cables about. But it was all to make gigs more efficient. It was all this hard work to try and make sure that we were better prepared when we turned up for really short load-ins and stuff like that. So certainly there's been none of that. And just band practice in general, collaborations in general. It used to be a big part of, face-to-face collaborations used to be a big part of my week. Sending out demos to people, making sure I had written out parts for them and stuff like that. There's been a lot less of that. Similar to what you just said in your, just a minute ago, about moving away from performance as much. I could echo that as well. It's been a lot more independent, which has been exciting actually for me, and something I have learned a lot from being forced to be independent. You know.
I think for me, suddenly moving from a performance and a collaborator to kind of more studio-based solo work has been kind of my way of continuing to find creativity and inspiration during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like it's been I think it's quite taxing to be creative on a single instrument anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I think like just I needed something new and I needed something fresh to kind of keep me going. So I was like, oh, here's a skill that I've always wanted to learn and build on. And lockdown kind of gave me that opportunity to just learn something totally new that I've always wanted to learn.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that we've been afforded all this time. I mean, if going, prior to 2020, I never thought I would have the better part of a year to develop all these things. So it was always just about picking, like prioritizing and having a priority list and thinking, okay, what's actually likely that I'm ever going to be able to do? And then and a lot of the time for me, it ended up just being time wasted, perhaps, because, I'm a big believer in like practice routines and stuff like that. But when you don't really have the time to, or you feel like it's really my thing, but when you feel you don't have the time to really be kind of pushing forward and learning new stuff, it's this kind of struggle to stay where you are and kind of maintain these skills you already have, which is I've completely changed my outlook now. But at the time, I think I was really boxed in, and now after having a bit more time, I've thought actually, what was I doing? I was actually I was sucking all the fun out of it, sucking all the fun out of being a musician and this element of discovery and progression, because I felt I just had to, just had to keep doing the same thing daily.
I totally relate to that because over the past year, I dropped performance. So my first 2 years of university, I was a performance student. Now I'm a composition student.
Yeah.
But like that was exactly like me. Like when I was a performance student, I wasn't being creative. I was trying to progress. Like my days weren't like sat at like as much as I love composing, it is quite tough to sit in front of a computer, but it is so freeing to sit with this blank canvas and just like do your thing as opposed to like running over scales or arpeggios or whatever. Something I wanted to kind of ask you about was actually kind of using scales and your approach to composition. When you're approaching composition and like you're seeking inspiration, do you sit down and compose quite methodically? Like, do you pick a key or go like, oh, here's maybe a mode or a technique that I want to work around or base this piece around? Or do you just kind of wait for ideas to come to you?
Yeah, it's a combination of both, really. It does a lot of the time. It's a kind of light bulb moment. Is it going to be fast? Is it going to be slow, heavy, quiet? Or is it going to be progressive? Is it going to be long? Is it going to be short? That kind of stuff. I'll have a kind of concrete idea of its form, and then that kind of leads on to some ideas about the music. So I'll start, I'll maybe just set an instrument and start kind of working out some fragments, and then the fragments build up. They, usually, hopefully, after some time, they'll fit into an order that I like and seems quite comprehensive. And then I listen back and refine it. But I mean, in terms of using scales and modes, I don't usually decide on that at the time. Although if I do have a concept, usually it does imply scales modes in my head. If I'm trying to capture a certain feel or a certain mood, I know which ones to go to because I've studied them.
I don't know. I'm really torn on this whole thing because I think I approach composition very methodically, particularly it depends where I start from as well. So if I'm like, obviously I am a guitarist kind of as my main instrument, but so I will kind of play about and get riffs from that quite a lot, but I also like, maybe I will like pick a certain mode or like some way of writing, or like, but I think that's something I've kind of got more from producing actually. Whenever I sit down to make a beat, I almost always start by kind of thinking of what I want to improve in my production or what I want to work on, because I'm really lucky that I'm still at that stage of kind of learning. I'm not quite, no one's asking me to go and make beats that are going to like get in the top 10 of the charts at the moment. So I'm very free to kind of be improving. So I think because of that, I always pick techniques to work on actually. But I think it's really funny, and I would like to know if there's like equivalents in other genres. But I was speaking to a fiddle player recently, and we were kind of speaking about both of our respective approaches to writing tunes. And he was saying, I was telling him, oh, I'll write an A part, and then for the B part, I'll kind of hear the chords in my head before the melody, and I'll be like, oh, I maybe want this to lift in a certain way, so for the B part, let's move to the 4 chord, and then I'll base like my B part around that. But to him, that was totally alien, which I found completely ridiculous. But then when I watch him play, he can sit and rattle off bars and bars and bars of really great original melodies.
Yeah. So
So
he's thinking in a kind of melodic way, and you're thinking more in the kind of harmonic shape. Yeah.
So over the course of lockdown, then, have you kind of changed your approach to composition at all, or is it more or less the same?
I mean, I've certainly learned more skills to help me. My ear's a bit better now. My knowledge of instrumentation certainly a lot stronger. So stuff like that's helped me a lot, and it's all practicing that, so it cuts down the time. There's nothing worse or more frustrating for me when you know how it should all sound. You know what the finished product should be,
Yeah.
and you're thinking, how am I going to get to that? How many steps is it going to take? How long am I going to have to sit in front of a MIDI keyboard pressing notes at random until I find the ones I want?
So with the whole COVID thing, it's, as I kind of said earlier, it is quite taxing to be creative. And do you have anything that you think you've kept going through the lockdown that's really helped preserve your creativity? So for me, I've tried to preserve quite like a rigid daily schedule, and I think that's helped me a lot with my composing, like that 1 to however many hours I spend a day, like where this is my composition time. Do you have anything like that?
I basically just kept my kind of working hours as hours to do music stuff, and it would change. I would try and keep it quite varied from day to day. So I mean, if I had 4 things to do in a day, and then I was doing the same 4 things the next day, I would try and do them in a different order, that kind of thing. But usually what would end up happening is I would spend one day completely on instrument stuff, or one day completely, I would have like the morning theory and the afternoon on composing, and then I would try and just vary it as much as I could, because there is so much that I was trying to do and I was trying to develop. So I think yeah, just having the discipline and having the variety kept me going. If I'd been trying to approach it in the way I was doing before, I think I would have just packed it in, or very little would have gotten done. It would have been really tough.
I totally agree. And I think I'm so thankful to have music in my life for so many reasons anyway, but this whole COVID thing has really brought it to light, because, and don't get me wrong, I think we've all had our bad days during this, but to have something that I'm able to go to and quite consistently find joy and fulfillment from. Um, one thing that I've really struggled with though is like I I would say my entire life revolves around music. Um, but then when my creativity lulls, it kind of hits me quite hard because it's all I know and it's the one thing that I do find all my comfort in. Do you kind of have that experience as well?
I like to believe that every artist or every composer faces the same, but it does feel like I can go a long time, months, without writing anything, and probably just through the belief of not being able to write anything, or just not having the motivation, or just be believing that when I sit down, anything that I will write will be rubbish. I mean, the way I kind of approach that or try and get around that is just trying not to, as long as time's not a factor, I'll try not to force it. I'll try to like just do something else more mechanical, like ear training or music practice, or just listening to music, just like absorbing myself in certain new styles, or listening to new stuff and hoping eventually that I'll have a good idea. There'll be a kind of light bulb moment and I'll say, that's it, and I'll go to the computer and something good will happen. That's great to do if you don't have a deadline coming, but sometimes it is just a matter of sitting down and churning something out, grinding away, and seeing if actually any of it's going to be usable tomorrow.
It's something that I'm still really struggling with, actually, and like still struggling to crack. I think particularly like even at the moment, actually, I would say my past month has been like fairly rocky in terms of like creativity, and I think like I've happened to have just a really really ridiculously busy month. Um, but over Christmas, I kind of like I kind of burned out, and it was really intense, really horrible because I just wanted to make music and I just couldn't. But I think you've totally hit the nail on the head with what you were saying about kind of like that fear and that almost self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's kind of like, I think to be creative or to be a creative person, whatever that means, is inherently to be brave. I think to be creative, you kind of have to be, you are putting something out into the world that is a very personal, and I think risks always not being received that well. I think art by its nature should kind of risk that.
Have you ever had a point where you've considered like quitting?
See, that's actually really funny you say that, because I was thinking about this last night in terms of combating the whole, oh, I don't feel like anything I'm producing right now is worthwhile, because I was thinking like, oh, I'm not really happy with any of the tunes I've made in my free time. But then I was like, I'm obviously never going to quit though. So I was like, actually, see, when I start feeling like this, maybe I should just go and play guitar, because on the flip side of that, I've been producing a lot more recently. I've not really been playing as much guitar. I've
Mm-hmm.
not actually been finding that much joy in guitar recently, which has been really sad. And that's in turn put me off playing it. So what I was kind of thinking last night was, well, you're obviously, as low as you maybe feel right now, you're obviously not going to quit playing guitar. You're obviously not going to quit producing. So maybe when you feel like this, you should just knuckle down and do some like scalar exercises, like do some really mundane stuff on the guitar.
I think I have probably really considered it a few times. Maybe just
Really?
after, the the odd bad gig, or just, just things not kind of working out as you thought they would. And just I've thought like, how, what is the point? It's just, there's been so many times, but I think I've been exactly the same. I think it's not really a choice.
really nice quote that I can't remember word for word the other day, but it was someone speaking about passion, and they were kind of saying like passion by definition is like, you know, it's your strongest pursuit. It's your like calling in life. And actually, if you have a passion, you're probably already pursuing it, because to have a
Mhm.
passion is to die if you're not doing that thing. And I really do sympathize with that, because I don't think I would ever be me if I never played guitar. I
Mhm.
think even if I didn't produce, I could still be me, but I don't think if I play guitar, that is so integral to my identity.
How do you think other musicians have adapted during lockdown? Do you think there's going to be as much creativity? Do you think there's less?
I've seen a big mix, actually. And I think this is why I'm very happy that I picked up producing, because a lot of my friends who are more performance focused, and this is a massive generalization,
Mm.
um, I feel like I have seen performers drop off a little bit more, depending on kind of where they are on their career, obviously. But I think, going all the way back to what I was saying earlier, I think there are kind of areas where it's easier to find inspiration. And I think the way I think and my approach to composition, I've been able to adapt that, whereas I'm not so sure how you would kind of adapt it in the same way in a performance variant. But this was
Hmm.
something I kind of wanted to ask you. Do you think the pandemics affected different groups of musicians differently, i.e., like composers or performers or like DJs or whatever?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a lot invested in the validation of gigs. If I think a lot of performers, people that are exclusively performers, they're instrumentalists. I think that's going to be really tough for them without, because it's the same with myself and the band. Obviously we can't practice, but even if we could, if there was, the lockdown restrictions were different, and we could get together, but we couldn't play gigs. What That would be really difficult. We would find that we would have a lot of problems with motivation, I think, because we would be thinking we're improving, we're maybe being productive in some way, but who's going to know about it? I think that's going to be really tough for performers. For composers, I think it does present somewhat of an opportunity. I mean, I never want to sound like too chipper about this kind of stuff, but
Uh-huh.
I think that there is somewhat of an advantage for composers like myself, who are kind of at the beginning and want to progress and try new things. But there is the limitations as well, because again, who's going to play your music? Where are you going to get it performed? Who's going to do it? It's harder to find people to collaborate with as well. Or, well, if you don't know them already, it can be harder. I think.
Mhm.
I mean, have you managed to do many collaborations through the?
I think, yeah, someone said to me like a couple months into the pandemic, it's all about who's shouting the loudest at the moment,
Hmm.
which I do totally agree with. I think, but I think it's a funny one, because I don't think a lot of my peers and contemporaries that like I study with, I think they definitely probably produce like a similar amount of work to me, but I
Hmm.
definitely think I am someone who on social media kind of makes a big fuss about things, um, because I think half of music is just marketing.
Hmm.
So I feel quite funny about all of that, because I'm kind of like, I know what you mean, but I'm kind of like, I wish people would sometimes step into that sphere a bit more,
Hmm.
particularly because I think I've watched a few and they're not bad, but I'm also not a massive I'm not a huge fan of online gigs
Hmm.
because they don't contain any of the original essence or joy that I got from real life physical gigs.
Hmm.
So I think that suddenly the sphere that music holds is changing very dramatically.
Hmm.
So I don't necessarily think that artists should be targeting little videos anymore. I think we should be trying to adapt more with what people actually want to watch when they're at home. I've been working on kind of audio reactive visuals, and it still isn't something that constitutes or replaces a live gig, but it does. I think it adds a new element to my composition rather than someone just listening to it.
I don't really have a great handle on what's the most effective way to market your music, to promote it, especially through social media and stuff like that. I kind of, I have a real aversion to it, to be honest. I mean, it's a great tool, but just when it's all these kind of things that were quite collaborative before, getting people to help you with that kind of thing, and even with the producing videos, having accompanying images, graphics, animations, all that kind of stuff. That would just be straight outsourced to somebody that I knew could do it better. But now it's about internalizing all these processes, and trying to be kind of more, for me anyway, trying to be more self-sufficient, because if I can do that, then it makes me a more well-rounded creative. But it's I mean, what advice would you give to someone that needs having that doesn't really know how to effectively market, perhaps?
So I'd be interested to hear how your mind kind of interprets things like this, but I'm a very kind of short-sighted person. Like I almost wake up. This sounds really depressing. I don't mean it in a depressing way, but I kind of wake up every day and I'm like, right, I just need to take today as it comes and get through the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think I see things quite short-sighted, and my marketing skills, I've still got loads to learn, but they're the one skill that I'm like, it's actually very similar to music, because there's so often that I'll sit down and I'll try and learn. The last one I tried to learn was a polyphia riff, and I was like, oh, I can totally do this in an afternoon if I just slow it down enough. And it took me like a few solid days of doing that riff and sleeping on it. And I think music is like that. It's a skill you accumulate over and over time. And that's exactly what I did with like Instagram's kind of my main platform. Like I didn't really have a Scooby, and it's literally been a case of like learning, oh, there's this filter here that I can click on. Oh, actually like I can tag people like this, or I can like make a collage like this. And it's all little skills that like I've literally just picked up one by one on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I would kind of like advise people, if it's something you want to get more into, then just next time you post a photo, just try and put a filter on it, or try and like the one that took me ages to figure out was on Instagram stories. You can put they have like filters that users have built. It took me
Mm-hmm.
ages to find out how to do that, but like just pick something like that you've seen other people do in social media and just like really have a rummage about. I think on the flip side of that, though, I've just finished working. Well, I'm coming to the end of a commission that has involved me being on my phone a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I found it totally soul destroying. Like,
Yeah.
I find it. I love marketing my music because I think it's something that I really believe in. I know this is what I want to do with my life, so I know that I either have to do it now or do it further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard, and I think I used to be like you as well when I had a total aversion to it, and it took me quite a lot to kind of overcome, I think.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most valuable skills you could have at the moment as well. I mean, Turbine, we're getting ready to launch our next album, and it's only a few weeks away now, and it's the first time we've ever launched anything without a gig. Like with actually like you trying to get people into a room and playing the music to them and having this kind of big communal experience. So it's a completely different approach, where we're completely separate from the audience we're trying to speak to and trying to communicate with. And it's definitely a challenge, especially for someone like me who, thinks, okay, I've got to sort this out. And I'm looking at the screen, I'm thinking, this just isn't me. This is just not it's completely necessary. I completely understand how necessary it is. But I'm like, I just want to write music. I just want to, if there was only some way people would know.
I would love one day to just have a manager that I could hand everything over to.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to a podcast a few months ago, and it was talking about detecting burnout in creative people through emails.
Okay.
And it was basically saying that your emails have like no correlation to like what capacity you're completing your job in, unless your emails have nothing to do with the work you produce, which
Okay.
obviously that's most of the creative art. It's quite taxing, and I find it not so much marketing, but I find back end admin of bands really annoying to do, actually.
How do you mean, sorry?
Any kind of show management or
Oh, right.
sending
Yeah.
out press packs, that's my stuff that I'm actually like, that's the stuff that I really don't like doing. Whereas I don't mind doing marketing.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. To put it into perspective like that, I think I'd be better off at my computer than I would be, on the phone to people trying to sort out real people trying to sort out real
Yeah.
things.
Say that's the thing. We're musicians. We're not meant to interact with real people.
What do you think's next then? What do you think will happen? Kind of, I maybe not, a kind of, let's say, we get to this kind of promised place where, majority have been vaccinated and gigs are happening again, or they're beginning to happen again. How do you think things are going to change?
I'm actually very curious to see performers actually and see how performers act, because something I noticed, like when all the restrictions kind of started to be eased a little bit in summer, I kind of started seeing people a little bit again. And something I really noticed about people that I was interacting with was they had all changed in some sort of way from lockdown, um, albeit a lot of them probably subconsciously.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people were more timid or more reserved. Or on the flip side of that, there were some people who I noticed were suddenly quite brash and loud. And I think it had all just come from this lack of contact, or this contact with a very specific group of people who you're seeing all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm actually curious to see how that affects artists, and from in turn affecting artists, how that affects the more holistic kind of view of the entire industry.
You're going to get the people that are very cautious, and it's going to be such a violent change knowing that these options are there for them again. No matter how much they loved gigging or going to gigs as attendees, it's going to be a big step. It's going to be huge, and then there's going to be, so that makes me think, is it going to come back as strong as people expect or as people want? And then there's going to be this other side where it's going to be like the pandemic never happened. They're just going to be able to go straight back into it and just get on with life and enjoy it for what it is. So, and then in that case, it's going to be about, like you were saying about social media, which voice is shouting the loudest, which bands are going to get the audience, because, it's going to be really hard.
Are there any of those challenges that you're kind of concerned about for any of your projects?
I think with the band stuff, I am not too concerned because we've had our long break, and in a sense, the kind of break from gigging has saved us a bit. Like as I said, there were cracks beginning to show, and having the perspective has made us reevaluate. As me in particular, I've been able to reevaluate what was important and what I really want to continue with, and what maybe isn't as important. And so I'm sure we're just happy to kind of be ready when we're ready, and there's not going to be any urgency for education. I think that'll be more challenging because you're going in with all these expectations of being able to collaborate with new people, meet new creatives, and find opportunities through them, which is exactly what these courses are for, what they're so perfect for. But unfortunately, when you're doing all this through clunky Zoom conversations with 8 people in the room and nobody knows each other.
I've got to be honest, I'm actually, in general, I'm just quite nervous to go back to reality. Not for any like COVID reasons, but just like I'm I think naturally I'm quite an introverted person anyway, and I'm very lucky to have enjoyed a lot of lockdown. But I'm quite worried to suddenly be thrown back into the public sphere because um I do feel like my people skills have taken a bit of a bash in it. Not even my people skills actually. I feel like my emotions have just been totally like because of this whole thing, and I'm just like I've not had loads of collaborative projects, but I've found the ones I have had to be really difficult
Mm-hmm.
just because we're not in the same room as each other. And it's like when you're running a kind of laptop that's past its best and then you're exporting a stem every 15 minutes, like everything just so someone can hear this little adjustment you've made or this part you've put in, like it's very taxing. And I'm very curious to see how I suddenly deal with actually having to interact with people in a real life because yeah, and I I'm hoping this is just some of the people that I happen to be coming across at the moment, but sometimes I feel like my very limited interactions with people I find very frustrating.
I know what you mean. I This will be a setback for me and my people skills for sure. I'm very introverted, and sometimes, quite often, I've been alive a long time, and I should have built up then. And if I have been getting better, I have been getting better at talking to people. But quite a lot of the time, I am, conscious that sometimes I can just kill a conversation, and I'll never get over that. I'll be at home thinking, oh, what did I do? Why did I say that? And going back to that is a bit of a thought, face to face again.
I'd just like to very quickly say thank you so much to everyone at Dumfries Music Conference for allowing us this opportunity. It's been totally fantastic to be part of Talk, Play, Collaborate. If you do want to keep up with Dumfries Music Conference, you can follow them at Twitter at DMC_Dumfries, Instagram at Dumfries_music, or on Facebook at Dumfries Music Conference. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our ramblings. See you all later.
Hi, everyone.